Ebrahim Raisi, the eighth president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, was a figure of stark contrasts and unwavering convictions. Born into a devout family in Mashhad, Iran, Raisi's life was steeped in religious study from a young age. He rose through the ranks of the Iranian clergy, his path marked by an unwavering commitment to the principles of Islamic law. His early years were spent immersed in the world of seminaries and religious courts, where he honed his understanding of Islamic jurisprudence. His education laid the foundation for a career dedicated to upholding the tenets of his faith within Iran's legal and political framework. Raisi's ascent within Iran's judicial system was steady and unyielding. He held a series of increasingly prominent positions, including Prosecutor General of Tehran and Deputy Chief Justice. His reputation as a strict and uncompromising figure grew, his name becoming synonymous with the firm application of Islamic law. Raisi's critics often pointed to his role in the mass executions of political prisoners in the 1980s, a dark chapter in Iran's history that cast a long shadow over his career. Yet his supporters viewed him as a staunch defender of Islamic values, a man of principle who would uphold the core tenets of the revolution. Raisi's personal life remained largely out of the public eye. He was known to be a deeply private individual, his family life shielded from the scrutiny that often accompanies political office. His public persona was defined by his austere demeanor and his unwavering commitment to the principles of his faith. Raisi's speeches were often characterized by their religious and moralistic tone, his words resonating with those who shared his conservative worldview. He presented himself as a man of the people, a leader who understood the struggles of ordinary Iranians. Raisi's rise to the presidency marked a pivotal moment in Iran's history. His election signaled a shift towards a more conservative and ideologically driven government. His supporters saw in him a leader who would restore Iran's revolutionary zeal and strengthen its Islamic identity. His critics, however, feared a return to the repressive policies of the past, a tightening of social and political controls. Raisi's presidency was destined to be a period of both profound challenges and significant transformations, a time of uncertainty and change for Iran and the world. Raisi's entry into politics was marked by a calculated ascent through Iran's complex political landscape. His initial foray into the political arena came in 2016 when he was appointed custodian of Astan Quds Razavi, a wealthy and influential charitable foundation. This position gave him control over vast resources and allowed him to cultivate a network of loyalists within Iran's religious and political establishment. Raisi's tenure at Astan Quds Razavi further solidified his image as a pious and devout figure, enhancing his appeal among conservative voters. In 2017, Raisi made his first bid for the presidency, challenging incumbent Hassan Rouhani. His campaign focused on economic justice and a return to traditional values, appealing to those who felt left behind by Rouhani's more moderate policies. Despite a strong showing, Raisi ultimately fell short of victory, losing to Rouhani in a closely contested election. However, his campaign served as a springboard for his future political ambitions, establishing him as a leading figure within Iran's conservative camp. Raisi's second presidential bid in 2021 took place against a backdrop of growing economic hardship and political disillusionment. The Iranian economy had been battered by international sanctions and mismanagement, leaving many Iranians struggling to make ends meet. Raisi seized upon this discontent, promising to address the economic woes of the nation and restore Iran's standing on the world stage. His message resonated with voters, particularly those in rural areas and among the working class. The 2021 election was marked by low voter turnout and allegations of voter suppression. Several prominent reformist candidates were barred from running, effectively clearing the path for Raisi's victory. His opponents accused the Guardian Council, a powerful body responsible for vetting candidates, of manipulating the election in Raisi's favor. Despite the controversy surrounding the election, Raisi emerged victorious, securing a decisive mandate to lead Iran. His inauguration marked a new chapter in Iran's political history, one defined by a return to conservative principles and a hardening stance against the West. Raisi's presidency ushered in an era of heightened social and political control within Iran. His administration moved swiftly to tighten restrictions on freedom of expression, cracking down on dissent and independent media outlets. Journalists and activists faced increased harassment and intimidation, their voices silenced by a government determined to maintain its grip on power. The internet became a battleground for control, with the government implementing stricter censorship measures and blocking access to social media platforms. Raisi's economic policies focused on self-sufficiency and reducing reliance on the West. He prioritized domestic production and import substitution, aiming to shield Iran's economy from the impact of international sanctions. His government implemented austerity measures and sought to strengthen ties with regional allies, seeking alternative markets for Iranian goods. Raisi's economic vision was rooted in a belief that Iran could thrive despite Western pressure, fostering a sense of national resilience in the face of adversity. Social policies under Raisi reflected his conservative ideology and his commitment to upholding traditional values. His administration enforced stricter dress codes for women and cracked down on what it deemed immoral behavior. Religious institutions gained greater influence over public life, their role in shaping social norms and values reinforced by the government. Raisi's social policies aimed to create a more Islamic society, one that adhered to the principles of the revolution and resisted Western cultural influences. Despite his efforts to consolidate power and impose his vision on Iran, Raisi faced growing discontent among segments of the population. Economic hardship persisted despite his promises of improvement, and many Iranians felt the pinch of rising inflation and unemployment. Young people, in particular, chafed under the restrictions imposed on their social and personal freedoms, yearning for greater openness and engagement with the outside world. The seeds of unrest were sown, waiting for the right moment to sprout into open opposition. Section 4. Navigating the global stage. Raisi's foreign policy. Raisi's foreign policy was characterized by a defiant stance against the West and a strengthening of ties with regional allies. He viewed the United States and its allies as hostile forces, seeking to undermine Iran's sovereignty and impede its progress. Raisi's rhetoric was often fiery and uncompromising, his speeches laced with denunciations of Western imperialism and interference in the Middle East. He sought to position Iran as a leading voice of resistance against Western hegemony, rallying support among nations opposed to American influence. At the heart of Raisi's foreign policy was the nuclear issue. He inherited a complex and contentious legacy from his predecessors, with Iran's nuclear program remaining a source of international tension and suspicion. Raisi adopted a hard-line approach, demanding the lifting of all sanctions before Iran would consider curbing its nuclear activities. He viewed the sanctions as unjust and illegal, a tool of Western pressure aimed at crippling Iran's economy and forcing it into submission. Raisi sought to expand Iran's influence in the region by cultivating closer ties with like-minded governments. He strengthened relations with Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Shia militias in Iraq, forging a network of allies bound by shared interests and a common adversary in the West. Raisi viewed these alliances as crucial to countering American influence in the Middle East and promoting Iran's regional ambitions. He provided financial and military support to his allies, bolstering their capabilities and deepening Iran's involvement in regional conflicts. Raisi's foreign policy was met with a mixture of apprehension and cautious optimism by the international community. Western governments remained wary of his intentions, viewing him as a hardliner who was unlikely to compromise on key issues. Some regional powers, however, saw an opportunity to engage with Raisi and explore avenues for cooperation. His presidency represented a shift in the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, one that demanded a recalibration of alliances and a reassessment of existing strategies. Section 5. Whispers of discontent. Challenges to Raisi's rule. Despite his efforts to project an image of strength and stability, Raisi's rule was not without its challenges. Beneath the surface of his carefully crafted persona lay simmering discontent, fueled by economic hardship and social restrictions. Whispers of opposition grew louder, carried on the winds of frustration and a yearning for change. The seeds of unrest, sown in the fertile ground of unmet expectations, awaited the right conditions to blossom into open defiance. Economic hardship remained a persistent thorn in Raisi's side. Despite his government's efforts to stimulate the economy and alleviate the impact of sanctions, many Iranians continued to struggle. Inflation soared, eroding the value of their savings and making basic necessities increasingly unaffordable. Unemployment remained stubbornly high, particularly among young people, leaving many feeling disillusioned and hopeless. The gap between the government's promises and the reality of daily life widened, breeding resentment and frustration. Social restrictions imposed by Raisi's administration further fueled discontent, particularly among the younger generation. The internet, once a window to the outside world, became a tightly controlled space, with access to social media platforms restricted and independent voices silenced. The government's strict enforcement of dress codes and its crackdown on immoral behavior created a climate of fear and repression. Young people, yearning for greater personal freedoms and a more open society, chafed under these constraints, their dreams and aspirations stifled by the weight of tradition and control. The rumblings of discontent, once confined to hushed whispers, began to find expression in sporadic protests and acts of defiance. Students, activists, and ordinary citizens took to the streets, demanding greater economic opportunities, social freedoms, and an end to corruption. The government responded with force, deploying security forces to quell the unrest and arresting those deemed to be instigators. The cycle of protest and repression became a familiar dance, a testament to the deep-seated tensions that simmered beneath the surface of Iranian society.